I think a lot of times the reason why people talk over each other during arguments or during conflict is because they feel like if they don't say something, they won't be able to get it out and they won't be able to share what they're thinking about. You know what I mean? Whatever's on their mind, whatever's on their heart.
Hello, and welcome to a Purpose-Driven Marriage podcast. We are Dwayne and Nadine Stewart, and we love any and all things marriage. You've tuned into the right place if you're looking for actionable, practical tips to help you overcome real-life obstacles common to real relationships. We're here to help you strive for a marriage as God has designed it and not as the world has defined it. Because why settle for a good marriage when you can have a great one?
All right, so we're continuing our communication series, and I'm actually really excited about this one. I think I'm excited for every episode, but this one is about listening to understand.
Man, why? Why do we have to understand all the time? I feel like, no. I think this is important.
You think it's
I
important?
really do, because there's certain things that I feel are just things that I might have challenges with. So I think a lot of other people might have the same challenges. So in my opinion, this is a good one because it helped me for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think if it helps me, it probably could help a lot of other people too.
You think you have challenges listening to understand?
Yeah, I do.
You do?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's definitely times where I would rather just get what I want to say out, for sure. And it takes discipline. I think it takes a lot of discipline to just stop and say, okay, you know what? I am going to sit here and I'm going to hear my wife out, because that is what's going to move this discussion forward. I need to hear what she has to say, and I need to understand what she has to say, because she deserves it. You know what I mean? If something's on your mind, who else is going to be out there to listen to you? It's going to be me. You know what I mean? I don't want to be somebody else. So in my opinion, this is one of the best skills that you can develop in your relationship, is listening.
Great. I think we should get started on it then.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So today we're diving into a skill that might just be that secret sauce to creating a thriving marriage. And that's listening to understand. And another term for that a lot of people know is active listening.
Active listening.
Right?
Yeah.
Active listening.
You hear that in the corporate environment, active listening, when you're talking to clients, whatever it is, right? It's definitely something that I've heard for quite a while.
Yeah, well, it's so important though.
Yeah.
It's a very underrated skill. And I think it's actually one of the most underrated skill, if not the most underrated skill in marriage.
Yeah.
And when you think about the benefits of being able to do this and doing this consistently, it doesn't make any sense why you wouldn't do it. So there's a study in the Journal of Marriage and Family Therapy, and they found that couples who practiced active listening reported a 30% increase in relationship satisfaction compared to those who didn't prioritize listening skills.
Yeah.
And so it's 30%
That's
increase.
a lot. I know.
It's huge. And not only that, but according to the American Psychological Association, couples who engage in communication enhancing techniques like listening to understand, babe, get this, they are 47% less likely to divorce.
Yeah, well, why is that?
Right?
Well, you think about it. I mean, if you become a better listener, then you're going to understand what you're, like me talking to you, I'm going to understand better how you feel and what you're trying to communicate to me. And if I do that, then I'm going to be better at responding and actually providing whatever that response is that you need. I'm going to be better at it because I'm now understanding exactly what you're trying to communicate to me.
That's a really good point. And I think that we need to clarify or define what is listening to understand.
Yeah. So listening to understand it just means fully focusing on your partner's words, right? I mean, really just thinking about, okay, the emotions, the perspective, without jumping to conclusions, right? I mean, I think that's a big piece. So it's really just taking it all in without jumping to conclusions or even like trying to prepare a rebuttal. So it's really just about like connection, and it's not about like trying to respond right away. Mm-hmm. It's just like, okay, let me take this in. Let me really and truly understand what you're trying to say, not just verbally, but also non-verbally. You know what I mean?
Because a lot of people, I mean, listening is not an issue. Mm-hmm. For many of us, we listen very well, but our intention when we listen mm-hmm. is often not right.
Right.
Because for many of us, our intent when we listen is to come up with what we're going to say in response.
Yeah. And but so, do you think that's just hearing though?
That is hearing.
You
that's
know what
not necessarily.
I categorize hearing and listening in two different things.
Oh, that's so wise.
You know what I mean? So I'm listening to you. That means I'm like totally focused, mind, body, spirit, just focused on you and undivided attention. There's nothing else that's distracting me. I'm just focused on you. And then just hearing, you know, I heard you, because a lot of people could say, yeah, I heard what you said. You know what I mean? Yeah. I could be on my phone and I can hear you, but am I really listening to you? That's me. That's me in my opinion, right?
But here's the thing. You could be listening to me, mm-hmm. but you're not listening to try to understand me.
Yeah, that's the step. That's the second step, I think.
Exactly. You are listening and you're already formulating your response to me.
Right.
You know, you're in your head, you're like the trial attorney mm-hmm. that is just waiting for their chance to cross-examine.
I hear you.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so you're not looking to try to understand mm-hmm. what it is that I'm truly saying and mm-hmm. trying to understand my perspective. But instead, you're going to try to come up with whatever your response is to show me why your thoughts are innocent or your thoughts are correct and mm-hmm. maybe mine isn't, mm-hmm. or you want me to see your perspective or whatever it might be. But you're not taking the time to understand.
That'll come later.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Really where I'm coming from. Mm-hmm. And so listening to understand, you define that very well. But for many of us, we default to listening to respond. Right? So we're busy formulating our next point while the other person is talking.
Right.
And the problem with that is listening to respond often leaves the other person feeling dismissed or unheard.
Yeah, I understand that.
Right?
Yeah.
Babe, I have clients do this exercise where they learn how mm-hmm. to listen with the intent of truly trying to understand mm-hmm. what their partner is saying, what their wife or their husband is saying. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways I get them to do that is through this technique called witnessing, which is essentially, you know, really trying to focus on what they're saying, mm-hmm. the words that are being said, but mm-hmm. also the words that are not being said, but maybe getting communicated through the body language.
Right.
And so what they do is they essentially repeat back in their own words what they think their spouse was saying. Mm-hmm. And I kid you not, mm-hmm. I have had situations where a wife, one of her complaints is that she doesn't feel heard.
Right.
She doesn't feel heard because she feels her husband doesn't fully try to understand mm-hmm. where she's coming from or what she's truly feeling. And I've had couples sit there where after the woman expresses her feelings and then her husband summarizes and repeats back to her what he thinks he heard.
Yeah.
When, you know, there's usually mm-hmm. a lot more to do after that, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's, you know, curiosity, asking questions, all those things. Right, yeah. But I've had on numerous occasions where the wife is like, you know what, we can stop right now because mm-hmm. we have never gotten this far.
Yeah.
And I feel so good. Like she's mm-hmm. in tears mm-hmm. because for the first time, she feels like her husband truly understands where she's coming from.
Because he was actually focused on listening, right?
Exactly.
The thing is that I think that in most cases, while your spouse is talking, you're keying in on words, right?
Exactly.
You're keying in on specific words that you heard, and then you're like, oh, is that it? Okay. And then that one word, that's something that you are now focused on, that is what you are now thinking about what your response is going to be. Mm-hmm. And so you may have heard a portion of what your spouse said, but you didn't hear the whole thing, and you really don't really truly understand like what they're trying to communicate to you because you only kind of focus on the first portion of it or the last portion of it or the middle portion of it, whatever that is, but not the whole thing.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And, you know, unfortunately, you're doing your marriage a huge disservice. Mm-hmm. when you don't take the time to do that.
Yeah.
Right? When you don't take the time to do that, because, truly tuning into your partner's emotions is a key predictor of long-term relationship success.
Yeah.
So when couples listen to understand, they're more likely to repair conflicts and strengthen their emotional bond.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Dr. John Gottman calls that emotional attunement.
Okay.
That's what he calls that. And a lot of his research indicates that when couples are emotionally attuned with one another, their marriage works.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we talked about this before. We talked about like empathizing, right? And really just creating an environment where there's mutual respect. I think all those things do come into play when you actually actively listen.
Yes.
Because that just shows your partner that you actually care.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of the reasons why listening to understand is crucial in marriage. Now, we've mentioned a couple of studies, but there are a lot of other reasons that support why, if you're not doing this yet, if you're not doing this right now, you need to learn how to do this, and you need to begin incorporating this into your marriage, because it is such a game changer. It is so tremendously beneficial that by not doing it, you're really doing your marriage a huge disservice. But one of the biggest benefits is that it builds emotional intimacy.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that pretty much everything, I mean, we could add that with, that could be a response, or not an unintended response, but it's just a byproduct of treating your spouse the way they would like to be treated. I think you just feel love, when things like this, or when you're able to do this.
It's so funny because I think we've said that in the last 5 episodes. Yeah. If you do this, it will build emotional intimacy. But really what it is it's in the intentionality. Right? You are prioritizing your relationship. You're prioritizing your marriage. And as a result, your spouse feels like you're prioritizing them.
That's right.
So, when we talk about empathy being the foundation of intimacy, there's actually a study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships that found that empathy is one of the strongest predictors of emotional closeness in couples. So when you listen to understand, what it is that you're communicating to your spouse is, hey, I see you. I value you.
Yeah, I totally see that. I can feel it myself. Like, I know that there's times when, I'm talking and then, or I don't know, we might have a misunderstanding or whatever it is. And you might come back and you say, oh, you know what? I understand where you're coming from. And you come back and you kind of repeat the things that I just discussed. And when you show empathy and understanding, and where, like, I guess putting yourself in my shoes, it makes me feel good. You know what I mean? It does. And so I can assume that you feel the same way.
Yeah, I totally agree. So that's one benefit of learning how to listen to understand, is that it builds emotional intimacy. Yeah. So what's the second benefit?
The second benefit, I think everybody can guess this one. It's reducing conflict. Surprise. If you listen, you're not going to have as many conflicts. I think it's a no-brainer. There's a study that talks about miscommunication, and it says that it's the leading cause of marital strife. Go figure. So, you know what I mean? It's like, all right, so if I'm saying something and you're saying something and neither of us are understanding each other, guess what? We're both going to be frustrated. That's how that works. But couples who actively listen during conflicts are better equipped to resolve issues constructively. Yeah. And so to me, that's exciting. You know what I mean? And so it's like, okay, people are fighting all the time. And you say, well, what is the one thing that you can do to really help you to not fight? Guess what? It's active listening. Let's practice this. It might be difficult for some people to implement, but at least you have something tangible that you can work on.
Yeah. How often have we had those arguments where we're just talking over each other?
Yeah, I know.
Right? Like we're both thinking we're wanting to be heard. Like somehow we're looking at this from a victim perspective where, no, if you'd only hear me, then you'd understand. But we're both doing that. Yep. What if instead one person said, look, I want to make sure I understand you before I share my thoughts. How much less tense would that conversation feel?
Yeah.
Right? Like, look, It sounds right now as we talk about it like, oh, no brainer. This is so easy. This is so simple. But we do get that in the heat of it all.
That's what
I
was thinking about. In the heat of the moment.
In the heat of the moment, we're fighting for our perspective to be heard.
Right.
But that's really not the goal of communication. I think a lot of people think the goal of communication is to solve it. And in order to solve it, you need to hear my perspective, because if you only heard my perspective, then you'd understand that I was right all along.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like,
and you were wrong about what you thought about me. Okay.
Exactly. But if we just kind of switch that mindset and made understanding and not even like focusing on getting them to understand us, but more so trying to understand them, trying to understand the other person, and made that our goal, oh my goodness, like we would have far fewer fights in marriage.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think a lot of times the reason why people talk over each other during arguments or during conflict is because they feel like if they don't say something, they won't be able to get it out, and they won't be able to share what they're thinking about. You know what I mean? Whatever's on their mind, whatever's on their heart. That's, I think, the challenge. And so if that person felt like, you know what, I'm just going to listen, I'm just going to understand, and then I'm going to be able to have my time too. I think then you wouldn't have the urge or that desperate need to just blurt it out and talk over the other person, because we know that there are rules to this discussion, right? You talk, I listen, and then we talk about what all that stuff means and really seeking to understand. And then guess what? I talk and then you listen. And at some point in time, we all come to an agreement and we're all good.
Yeah, well, that's in theory, and in a fantasy world, that would be fantastic if everyone did that. But the fact of the matter is, that's not how it often goes in relationships, because we tend to default to fighting for our own perspective and wanting to be heard. But you know what ends up happening? So studies show that 69% of what we argue about in marriage is perpetual. Yeah. Meaning it's the same fights over and over. But the reason is because we don't actually take the time to understand how the other person is feeling or what the other person is trying to say. We're spending way too much time trying to get our own perspective across. And as a result, we end up fighting about the same things over and over.
So if you are tired of fighting about the same things over and over again, because it does get tiring after a while. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, this again, let's try active listening.
Yeah. Hey, I love it. Yeah. There's another benefit to it that's actually, I think would surprise a lot of people. And that is for those that have children. There's research from the Journal of Family Communication that shows that children in families where parents model active listening are more likely to develop strong communication skills themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, kids they mimic their parents. It's pretty obvious. And so if they see their parents doing life and relationship the right way, listening to their spouse, loving their spouse, you know what I mean? Respecting you. Guess what? My son is going to do the same thing to whoever he meets out there in this world. And our daughters are going to do the same things that you do. So if we model that right behavior, we're very likely to see our kids do the same thing.
You and I have 5 young adult children at this point. Then we have 1 teen son.
And about to become a young adult.
Yep, who's about to become a young adult. And we're already seeing this in our daughters. Yeah. Right? Those of our daughters that are dating. For those with children, at some point, your kids, just like our kids, will start having relationships and they'll date and then they'll get married someday. And the default way they will learn or they will know how to communicate in their own relationships will be first and foremost how they learned it at home. Yep. And, if it's not healthy, or maybe even if it's healthy and they choose to do something different, that's on them. But the default is going to be what they learn from their parents.
Yeah. Well, also, let's think about it. If we are modeling this type of behavior with us,
Yes.
then if we're having a discussion with our kids or there's a conflict, they did something wrong, right? We say the kids did something wrong. All right. Then they're trying to defend themselves. If we show the same types of behavior, right? Active listening to them and help and understanding exactly where they're coming from before we respond, instead of talking over them like a parent would, you know what I mean? I could definitely see myself doing that. Guess what? They'd be like, oh, okay. Is that how you do it? And so if we continue doing it that way, they're going to learn. They're going to key on that.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to learn. And then that's something that they'll take with their friendship relationships. And then also when they start dating and, eventually get married.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I've actually noticed that in at least one of our kids, where if she feels that she is not being understood, like we're responding before we truly understand her, you see a change in her body language. Like she just kind of freezes up.
Yep.
And then she's no longer interested in opening up to us and having a conversation with us, because she thinks that there's no way we could possibly understand.
Yeah.
And so imagine if that happens with, a young adult, what's that doing in our relationships?
Yeah.
Right? In our marriages. So anyways, why is it that listening to understand, or active listening, why is it so
difficult?
Like what makes it so challenging?
I could always tell like how you're like what you're gonna say, because I'm like, maybe 30 years is a long time to get to know somebody. But yeah, keep going.
I think it's a good amount of time.
Yeah.
Right? Why do you think that it can be so challenging for couples to be able to listen actively to one another?
Yeah.
Like, why is that so hard?
Oh, why is it so hard?
Yeah.
For sure. Well, number one is distractions.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, that's number one, because I know that you get frustrated whenever I'm distracted and you're trying to say something to me. You know what I mean? If I have my phone, if I look down while you're talking to me, and I think this is just a respect thing, and I hear you stop talking, I'm like, oh yeah, let me put this down. Because she's like, you're not looking at me. I need you to focus, because this is something that's important, and I need your undivided attention. And I'm like, okay, I get that. You know what I mean? Because I would want the same thing from you if I was telling you something that was important.
Yeah, absolutely. But, in our busy lives, we've got our work. Like, how often do you and I take our work home with us? I mean, we don't mean to, but,
That's just life.
That's just life. We have things that we can't finish during the day. And so sometimes we try to sneak in time to get it done when we're at home.
Right.
But as I stated at the beginning of this episode, there's a study in the American Psychological Association that says that couples who prioritize listening are 47% less likely to divorce, right? And so if that is a huge benefit to the marriage, then you need to remove those distractions. And start listening.
Yeah.
Like figure out how to do that.
100%. I think that people need to make sure that they set themselves up for success.
Yeah.
I mean, find the environment that's going to give you and your spouse the least amount of distractions and the best opportunity for you to see, hear, and understand what they're trying to say. Because if you do that, then, like I said, you're setting yourself up for a great conversation. I'm going to hear what you're saying. You're going to hear what I'm saying. And we're going to come to a resolution if it's a conflict. If it's not a conflict, then I'm just going to be able to hear what you're trying to say and be able to respond in a way that you need me to respond.
Absolutely. And, if you struggle with giving your spouse your focus and undivided attention, one of the things that we recommend is finding a designated area, whether it's a chair, a couch, or in our case, it's our bed or our bedroom, where you can go. And it's something that both you and your spouse understand, that when one partner sits there, the other agrees to give their full attention. And so even if you have to designate certain parts of your home for that, especially if active listening doesn't come naturally for you yet, if that's still something that you're working on, then get a space, or maybe get a paddle and hand your spouse, say, now you got to listen.
Yeah. Maybe it's the car. Maybe you got to go in the car or something.
Oh, you know what? I know people that do that.
Oh, yeah. I can see it.
Yeah. People that go in the car, they're trapped.
Yeah. Can't go nowhere. We're going on a trip. We're going on a road trip.
Yeah, before you know it, the kids are knocking on the window.
Yeah.
So what's another common challenge that makes listening to understand so challenging?
I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, is defensiveness. It's really difficult to listen when you're feeling defensive. So when you feel attacked, it's really easy. You know what I mean? And so you really now you're not even focused on whatever the other person's saying. Now all you're focused on is defending yourself.
Yeah.
And so if you're feeling defensive, then there's really no way that you're going to be able to absorb any input that your spouse is giving to you. It's all going to be, I hear what you're saying. Like I said before, I hear what you're saying. And that's okay because I'm going to tell you why you're wrong.
Well, I have 2 tips to help with that.
Yep.
So the first one is not letting it get there in the first place, or at least trying really hard to not let it get there in the first place. And the way that you do that is for the speaker to start the conversation off in a way that's not critical.
Yeah.
So that the listener, so in our case, if I wanted to talk to you about something, setting the conversation up for success by making sure I don't make you feel criticized can help to reduce the likelihood of you feeling defensive.
Yeah.
And so for me to start our conversations with an I feel statement and trying to avoid the words never or always or you. So it's not like a direct attack, or at least not a perceived attack on you. So I would say something like, I feel blank when blank, and what I need is this.
Yeah.
Right? I feel alone when it comes to doing dishes. And what I need is more help after dinner.
Right.
And so that's actually not something that that's not a real scenario.
But then at that point, if you're listening, right, active listening, then you would ask a question like, okay, so what causes you to feel that way? Help me to understand where those feelings are coming from and why you feel that way, right?
Yes. Or the first step would be to witness, which is to summarize what you think I said, right? And so if I'm hearing you correctly, you already made dinner, and now you're also stuck doing the dishes, and you really would love some help. Would love for me to come in and help you out so you don't feel like you're doing everything all by yourself.
Right.
So that's witnessing. So it's basically summarizing what it was that you heard me say.
Exactly.
To make sure that you and I are on the same page.
You talked about that a little bit earlier too, that you don't do with couples.
Yeah, exactly.
So after you witness, then now, and you get agreement, now you know you're tracking. You're on the right path.
Exactly.
And then you can kind of move the conversation forward.
Yep, absolutely. But then my second tip is if, let's say, it did not start off too well and there was criticism, or in some cases, even when you start the conversation off as nicely, as softly as you can, the other person still gets defensive. And for some people, that's just their default. It's something that they need to work on.
Yeah.
But one thing that you guys can do for the person that is feeling defensive is to call a timeout. Right. Call a timeout. I mean, that's very early in the conversation, but let's just say.
It's funny you say that because I was thinking that.
You were thinking about the timeout?
Before you even said any of that stuff, I was thinking, okay, it's probably timeout. That's what I was thinking about. So that's why we're married.
Yeah, exactly. So, when your emotions are running high, you say, hey, look, I get where you're coming from. I hear you, but I need just a moment to process what you said so I can listen better.
Yeah.
And taking a time out, a lot of people may see that as feeling dismissive, right? Like, oh, you just don't want to have this conversation. But not if you and your spouse come to an agreement, not necessarily in that moment, but, way ahead of any conflict, right? You guys agree that, hey, if ever there's a time when we're feeling defensive, our emotions are running high, let's call a timeout. And you guys define what that timeout means for you.
Right.
What I tell my clients is the words timeout should mean that our relationship is so important that I want to do everything I can to preserve it and make sure that I don't cause any damage to it. And right now, my emotions are running too high that anything I were to say would not be helpful to the relationship.
Right.
So
it's out of respect.
Exactly. Because I love you so much and because this relationship matters to me so much, I'm going to excuse myself for a short period of time.
Yeah. So that's the key right there, babe.
Exactly.
I think there is a time limit on the timeout.
Absolutely.
Just like in any game, it could be a 1 minute, 5 minute, it could be 10 intermission, whatever it is. But, you stop time with the intention of coming back, but coming back in a better place so that you can have constructive and good discussions.
Exactly. In fact, when I talk to clients about it, that is the number one fear of the partner that usually wants to be able to have the conversations. Their fear is that their spouse will not return.
Right.
That they will not re-engage. So that needs to be part of the rules. And that is whoever calls a timeout calls a time in.
Right.
And the time in needs to happen within a reasonable amount of time because really you're calling the time out because your emotions are running high, which means your heart rate is elevated and you're not thinking right. It really, for the average adult, only takes about 20 minutes to regulate your heart rate.
Right.
So a time in can happen as soon as 20 minutes after you call the time out.
Right.
However, we do know that life happens, right? If you guys are having this conversation or disagreement or conflict in the morning right before you guys are heading off to work, you may not
be able to talk again until you get back.
Exactly.
Right.
And so if you guys respectfully came to an agreement that, hey, babe, I had a chance to think things through. My emotions are not running high anymore. I'd love to hear more about what you were saying. Can we spend some time after work today to talk about it?
I got a question.
Sure.
Would you recommend, if it was something that someone felt like needed to be resolved during the day so that it didn't affect like the whole day, you know what I mean? Because you know how feelings kind of brew and they start to heighten over a period of time. Would you recommend having the conversation, I guess depending on how severe the conflict is, over the phone? Over the phone? Or FaceTime or something like that?
Only if both couples are in agreement. Like if both partners are in agreement, then that's okay. But really, when you call the timeout, what you need to be doing is two things. One is a stress reducing exercise. So whatever it is that you need to do to get your heart rate back to its normal rhythm, normal rate, right? And so whatever that might be, yoga, going out for a run, taking a shower.
We pray.
Right? We pray, whatever it is. And then the other thing is when you are thinking about it or when you are spending time apart, you need to really be trying to process what just happened from your spouse's perspective. And so even when you guys are apart, you're trying to understand your spouse's perspective.
So doing some reflection.
Exactly. Yeah. What you should not be doing is reinforcing your own argument and your own perspective, which is what a lot of us do. So to answer your question, can you try to resolve it over the phone? Can you try to resolve it on FaceTime or whatever it might be, just so no one is stewing all day? I would say the person that had to walk away because their emotions are high, if they're able to get to a point where their heart rate's regulated again and they have taken the time to understand their spouse's perspective, then yeah, absolutely. Call your spouse and say, hey, I've been reflecting on what happened this morning, and I just wanted to let you know that I hear what you were saying. I think what you were trying to say to me is this, and it makes sense why you feel the way that you do, or I understand why you feel the way that you do, and then maybe follow up with some questions. Right. And so yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if it's agreed upon, you can do it over the phone, FaceTime. If not, then you can talk about that when you get back at the respective time and place to make sure that there's no distractions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's kind of funny because I feel like you and I get to practice so many of these things in our own relationship. I mean, and I think that whether you give yourself enough credit for it or not, I actually think that you do a great job of listening. Oh. Yeah. I think you went from trying to figure out what listening is, to really trying to make the effort to do so.
Yeah.
And I know that this is an area, as we've talked about in previous episodes, that has been the greatest area of struggle, but you recognize it, so you continue to work on it and you continue to get better at it.
I think that's what growth is all about. I mean, we've been together for 31 years. It's not like I wanted to stop today.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Let's go for another 31, baby. So if that's the case, then, we have to grow.
Yeah.
Over a period of time. And so if you start off not doing well and you see what that results in, and you say, okay, what do I need to fix in order to allow us to have a more fruitful, enjoyable relationship that's less stress, you know what I mean?
Well, that's huge. I'm so glad you said the word stress, because I can tell you this smile on my face that it's not fake. People see me smiling all the time.
Yeah.
And that's because I think my stress levels are actually a lot lower than they could be. Right? When you think about all of our responsibilities, I should not be smiling so much, but my stress levels are actually really low. And it's interesting because a study in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine in 2018 found that couples who felt heard by their partners had lower cortisol levels during conflict, which is the stress hormone.
Yeah. So that's not only going to help you have a better relationship and improve your listening skills, but it's also going to make you healthier.
And imagine that. Guys, all you have to do is practice listening to understand.
That's what cardiologists say. That should be the first thing they say.
Yeah.
Are you listening to your wife or to your husband? Well, shoot, you need to start doing that. That's going to lower your blood pressure.
You do that, and their stress levels will go down. But I think this is a great place to finish up.
Yeah.
And so the bottom line is, when you listen to understand, right, you're not just hearing words, you're hearing your spouse's heart, as you're saying. The cardiologist is very interested in that.
Yeah.
And that really right there is what makes marriages thrive.
Yes, sir.
That's one of
that.
It creates, as you have been saying over and over, it creates emotional intimacy, and intimacy leads to connection.
That's right.
And connection is the secret to having a thriving marriage.
I thought you were going to say a purpose-driven marriage.
That is what is a purpose-driven marriage. So this week, we're going to challenge you guys to try.
Listen up. I love this. We're going to do this too this week.
Yeah. We're going to challenge you guys to try listening to each other, but not the way that we default to listening, but really, truly trying to understand your spouse. Take some time when they're talking to you, witness back to them what you think they said, like have them hear how you interpreted what they said. Ask questions, validate them, and see what it does. See if it makes a difference in their body language, in their facial expression. Ask them if they felt better heard by you and better connected to you as a result.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. No, let us know how it goes. Tag us on social media or send us a DM or an email or whatever. Let us know. Share your story with us. We would love to hear how it all goes.
I love it.
Okay. Well, we'll
Can't
see you
wait.
guys next week as we continue our communication series.
See y'all later.
Bye.